Hello and welcome to the Boundless Book Club from the Emirates Literature Foundation. You are here with
Annabelle,
Andrea,
and Ahlam. At the Emirates Literature Foundation, we like nothing more than to talk about books. And in literature, as with anything else, some of the best conversations stem from the most juicy scandals and controversies. So today we're going to be talking about some controversies within literature. Hi,
dun,
guys.
dun, dun.
Excellent.
So, what are we talking about today?
I would like to open by saying I think what is considered scandalous changes quite a lot over time. So during my research, I found that Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham was banned for several years in the US for communism. And I have just read Green Eggs and Ham the other day, and I really struggled to figure it out.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's context as well, right? It's what perspective you're reading it from, and you know the consequence, like the circumstances, around a specific book, like you say, what the author's beliefs are, how their actions are, how the book is perceived in a certain market, what are its effects on certain minority communities, and these are some of the things that make a certain book controversial or not. And just before actually this recording, I read something online which came to me in like the perfect time about the what we're going to discuss today. It says, when you debate a person about something that affects them more than it affects you, remember that it will be a much greater emotional toll on them than on you. For you, it might feel like an academic exercise. For them, it feels like revealing their pain, only to have you dismiss their experience and sometimes their humanity. The fact that you might remain more calm under these circumstances is a consequence of your privilege, not increased objectivity on your part. The book that I've chosen today, I think I'll go straight into it.
Go for it.
It really put things into perspective before I come into this conversation, because the book I'm talking about today is American Dirt by Jeanine Cummins, which had a lot of controversy around it in the US and amongst the Latinx community. So I'll go to the plot of the book first. And the plot is about Lydia, who is a middle-class mother living in the town of Acapulco in Mexico, and has an 8-year-old son, Luca. She's married and she has a bookshop. And somehow in the bookshop, she gets into this relationship, this somehow flirtatious relationship with a narco, which, she didn't know who he was. And then she gets stuck in this situation. And then he starts to pursue her strongly, which puts her family in danger and her life in danger. So she's taking her son, Luca, and escaping to the United States, or the land of the free. And so the controversy around the story has been, well, it started with, first of all, Oprah picking it for her book club, which gave a huge amount of attention to the book. The writer, Jeanine herself, is neither Mexican nor an immigrant. So, to start with, a lot of the people were saying, what gives someone the right to talk about something that is so sensitive, but they have no experience or deep understanding of. And I think, a lot of the frustration, again, to put things into context with everything that's happening in the US right now, racism in American publishing as well. So I have some stats that I'm going to share with you guys. So of the books that are published in America, 84% are of Caucasian white authors, 5% Asian, 4% mixed race, 3% Hispanic, 2% Black African American, 2% other. So, Americans, but looking at the divide in race of how much of a voice you get because of your gender is insane. And that's where all this frustration comes from, where they're like, okay, for Oprah to say that this is the first book that has given her such a, opened her heart to the situation, or given her that kind of empathy or understanding of the situation. First of all, it's false, because the book is inaccurate and sort of reinforces a lot of false stereotypes about that whole, the situation in Mexico, and the immigration that happens, illegal immigration and things like that. And the book, went to the publishers at the time when Trump had just come into office. So it's, the whole, him trying to build a wall, and Mexican families being put in cages at the borders. So you think about where people are coming from, and then to say, they pick the one book which sort of reinforces their own narrative, or that story that they want people to read and highlight. It's not a right representation. Now, we obviously want, as writers of fiction should be able to write about whatever they want, right? You write fiction, and you're not supposed to just write about your own experiences or your own backgrounds. You're supposed to research different situations and write whatever you want. The problem, I think, isn't really in the book. It's the moment people started to highlight it as that book that's giving people understanding of the situation, where all the controversy started, and it started to be a sour topic for a lot of people.
Yeah, because I think the way it was marketed as well, and the way it ended up being talked about, if you read the marketing material, or just that, you can see that it's, as with most books, it's marketed as the book to understand this issue. And I from what I've understood, I don't think I've done as much research as you have, but that seems to be, I did go to the book online, and I looked at all the kind of the 5-star reviews, who they were by, and then the 1-star reviews and who they were from. And, it was members of that community who were like, look, this doesn't ring true. And they were able to bullet point list, look, you could have checked this, you could have checked this, you could have checked this. And from what I read, it seemed like beyond the writer, there were other people who could have stepped in and said, look, let's give this to some people in this community to read and give you feedback. And I wonder whether that happened, or how it happened, or whether there was more that could have been done, and kind of how that works with a book like that, especially in the times that we live.
Yeah. And I think the publishers really did not do their job right, or the homework when publishing this book, right? They should have made the necessary corrections, or done their research before it goes live, and before it's handed to Oprah to share with the whole world, since the subject is so sensitive, it affects so many people. I mean, we experience this as Arabs all the time. You watch Hollywood, huge, big budget films, how much money has gone into this, but you can't put a little bit of effort into finding an Arab to play an Arab, a Persian or a Indian, or, a Mexican person playing an Arab and speaking this cringy, bad Arabic. And you're like, for God's sake, you had George Clooney in the film, and you have Brad Pitt in the film. You have budget and access to do this right. There's so many Arabs in America. Why do you keep doing this? And they feel the same, because the editor of this book was like Argentinian American, and the language was not accurate. They're bringing in, like, the Spanish words were not accurately, the language wasn't right. And so it just made things all the more sour. But like you say, there was that launch party that they had, where barbed wires and borders
I was just
oh my God,
were like centerpieces at the tables, where people were having lobster, for example, and manicured.
I think that's where the bad taste comes from. It was like they were celebrating all the actual real atrocities that are happening at the time, as opposed to saying, here's a work of fiction.
A word that came up a lot, or a phrase in reviews and all over the place with this book, was trauma porn.
Yeah.
It seems like she's quite sad about everything. I mean, obviously.
Yeah.
And how her intentions were to kind of speak to people, and it seems highlight this because she was moved by the story. So it's quite sad to see how that completely spiraled out of control.
It's not her fault.
Yeah.
It's not her fault that she got published and an actual immigrant wasn't. So she wrote the best book she could, and it was bought for lots of money and published. And then they had this massive marketing campaign with barbed wire as part of that main image.
Yeah.
And I get it. I feel sad for her because her intentions were good. It wasn't, people didn't feel like it was her story to tell.
Yeah, and as someone like reading the book without thinking about that whole background, and it's someone who does not live in America and is not interacting with that situation in any way, I read the book and I saw the relationship of a mother with her son, and a mother who dug deep and found all the strength she could to save her son's life. And that for me was the story I was really gripped by and focused on. So again, it's all about your perspective, right? Like your context, where you're coming from. And I guess I just didn't see it when I was reading it from that perspective. But then now doing the research and hearing people out, you sort of understand that actually it makes a lot of sense.
I've spoken to someone who covered this in their book club, and we're talking about this controversy like it's this, massive thing that everyone is aware of. I think because we are involved in the book community and the book world, we are aware of the controversy and we think that everyone else is sometimes, but they had no clue about this other conversation going on behind the book. And I think that is a big part of those 1-star Amazon reviews. That's the one book a year somebody reads. That is the only experience of that community that they're having. And they're not necessarily paying attention to these other conversations. People are busy, there's other stuff in the news. So it really took me aback to think that people weren't engaging with this conversation about the book.
Yeah.
They were just reading the book and moving on.
Yeah. Well, that's my controversial book of the episode. What do you guys have?
I want to know what Andrea's got.
I have got so Aklam's got a very contemporary controversy. I've got one from 1955. It's Vladimir Nabokov's Lolita, which was banned for many, many years. I wanted to read a passage actually, but it's so feverish in pitch that it was impossible to pull out a passage and read it to you and for that to represent the book, because it's really uncomfortable. For those who don't know, it's a story of Humbert, a middle-aged man who falls in love with a 12-year-old girl called Lolita, Dolores, but Lolita is his pet name for her, and he marries her mother, who passes away, and then he goes on this frantic, horrible road trip / kidnapping escape with the 12-year-old girl. And it's a really horrific story that is written so incredibly well, and the way he has done it just, you are inside Humbert, not just inside his head, you're inside his skin. You are looking at Lolita through his eyes. And some people call it the greatest love story ever written. I don't feel like it is at all, but you are reading it and it's got this frantic pace, and you are in his skin, and you are, it's got such a momentum to it that you are feeling disgusted with yourself as you are reading it, as you imagine that he should be, but he isn't. And it's one of those books, again, that will be slightly painful to read, but it will be really worth the pain, and it will stay with you. And after years after reading it, even if you pick it up again, it will just bring you back to those feelings that you had while you read it the first time, which I think is an incredible achievement. I really recommend it. I know lots of people probably wouldn't want to engage with that topic because it is really difficult. It is a struggle. But again, I don't think Vladimir Nabokov had any personal first-hand experience of this topic. I don't think he represented a community. I think at the time when he wrote this, he was the only man in the world willing to put these thoughts and ideas onto paper, and you can see why it was banned. It was, it was outrageous, and it still is today.
But it's such an iconic story that, till today is controversial and is talked about and adapted in so many other books and movies and
songs. Yes. Ray references Nabokov all the time.
Yeah.
Well, Lolita is not just a word anymore, not just a name anymore. Lolita is representative of a prepubescent girl who is somewhat enticing for elderly men. It's incredible, and it's horrible, and it's exactly what the book is.
I mean, Lolita is a classic, and is it a classic because it's so well written? Like, is that why it's endured, even though it's so horrible? Is it also the controversy? People want to know what all the fuss is about.
I think it's so outrageous as a story, but the fact that you're still able to sort of enjoy the writing.
I think there's some kind of magic in the writing of this book. I haven't read anything else he's written, but you are just, it's like a really rapid current that you are swept away by, that you can't resist it. And you're so uncomfortably close to what is happening in it, that I think even if he was writing this about something else, the writing is so powerful that you can't resist it.
Yeah, no,
I think I'm still going to resist.
That's only because you haven't stepped into it yet.
Okay. I have a controversy that I can talk about if you're ready.
Great. That's why we're here.
Okay. All right. Okay. So from contemporary American dirt to 1955 Lolita, back to contemporary. We're going to talk about the Catholic Church, guys.
Excellent.
Okay. In a roundabout sort of way. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, because to do that, it would require a podcast of many days. We are going to be talking about the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. So this was a book that I completely forgot was even controversial. When I thought of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, the controversy that came to my mind, weirdly enough, was the controversy of saying that you like it rather than it offending anybody. And isn't it interesting how, like you say, Ahlam, your context, like your upbringing, the things that you bring to the book really impact how you perceive what's, offensive, what's inoffensive.
Yeah.
So I the first time I read this book, I was 12 years old, I think. And I read it, and I remember thinking, and I'm saying this on a recorded podcast, that I thought it was great. It was a mystery thriller, and I was thrilled the whole way. And when the movie came out in 2006, I loved that as well, because it had your man Tom Hanks in it, who is brilliant, playing Robert Langdon. Ian McKellen was in it as well. What's not to love? So I just thought it was this harmless story about, as you know, a guy appears murdered in the Louvre. Great setup. There are clues in paintings. There is apparently a 2,000-year-old secret that the church is trying to keep secret. And they come off at the end of the film, the Catholic Church, as, the bad guys who are trying to suppress the truth. And of course, there's the secret organization Opus Dei and their practices that come to light as well. And at the time, all of this completely passed me by. I was just a kid. I was like, oh, that was a great book. Really interesting. Let's move on now. It seems obvious that this whole thing would be fiction. But in interviews and in the beginning of the book, he's actually quoted as saying that all of the art, architecture, secret rituals, secret societies, all of that is historical fact. So if you unpick what he says in a kind of legal, lawyerly way, he's not really saying anything that isn't true. But the way it comes across before you open the book, now that I've gone back and in interviews, is he basically says, and he said this in an interview, 99% of it is true. 99%. That's what he said. I'm sorry, but what?
That seems questionable. I'm sure there would be a few lawyers who might be able to argue that for us in a court of law.
Yeah, so what he says here is there's a Harvard symbologist named Robert Langdon, and all of his action is fictionalized, but the background is all true. And that's what he said in an interview, all true. So you know what, I do understand, because there was such a backlash after this book was published, and particularly when the film started to come out as well. And that's something that I noticed a lot with anything that had a religious controversy. So I'm a big fan of a lot of the things that apparently anger quite a few churches and mothers groups I've discovered in the past 24 hours. Lucifer comics. The comics themselves, I couldn't find a lot of controversy about them. But the moment that they said that was being made into a TV series, when the trailer came out, before the show had even aired, you had mothers writing in saying, how dare you make Satan look like a sexy bad boy? Have either of you watched The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina?
One episode, I think.
Okay, so this was adapted from...
Is that the new Sabrina the Teenage Witch, the new adaptation? Okay.
It's a lot darker and deals in the occult a lot more than the one that we maybe grew up with years and years ago. And there was not only did they upset religious groups with that, but also in one of the episodes they had to get rid of a certain statue because they also angered the Satanic Temple.
Oh dear.
Oh wow.
That the Satanic Temple, based in Salem, Massachusetts, defines its mission in part to reject tyrannical authority and to encourage benevolence and empathy among all people. And so one of the symbols that they use in the goat-headed statue in the Sabrina series, they said being associated with a series like that gave them a bad name. So the moral of the story really is you can't please everyone. Well, if people are only going to read this and not do any extra research, I have lots of questions about that. Why would you not? And two, as a writer, you have to understand that as well, and that what you're saying will be taken for fact if you say that it's factual.
The issue is that the masses don't really go too deep into research on every topic, right? It's like people do have a tendency of taking things as they are, as they're presented, whether it's for lack of time or just, that's how the media and the press encourage you to be, one thing to the next, and take it as we give it to you. If you're not doing your research in depth about all sorts of different topics and making up your own mind, then you're always in danger of things influencing the masses towards where they shouldn't be.
This is why I think history books are more, I use the word dangerous, but they're more dangerous in terms of misinformation, I think, than historical fiction. Because at least with fiction, there is a certain kind of, okay, this might not all be 100% true. But if a history book is written and published, people take that as fact. And not to say that they're not all well researched, but every single history book is written by someone with a certain perspective.
So true.
And we can't forget that. So I think that's far more controversial, that is taken as more factual. Just so as a given.
And that's the reality of the world we live in. Every country, every region has their own version of history that they want their people to remember, and that's how it is. That's the way of the world. This is really interesting, guys.
Super interesting. But one thing, I have one question left for both of you, which is: do you actually recommend these two books that you have talked about? Do you think people should read the Da Vinci Code, Annabelle?
No. Oh no. Why are you asking?
You know what? I never read the book.
I have read it.
I never read the book, and I fell asleep during the movie, so I have no idea. But actually, I think I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna see what it's all about for myself.
Okay. Oh god. For anyone who likes a really quick read and isn't bothered too much about the writing style, then give it a go. And I'm pretty sure everyone has already anyway. So there's no point either way of me recommending it. I know that's a cop-out answer.
It really is. Ahlam?
Look, for me, it's like, it's a really quick read. It's like if you're on a train ride somewhere and you want something like that's just, it's an easy read. It's not the most, the characters are not always the most believable. It's not necessarily very strong writing, but
I think that's a no. If it takes you like 50 words to get to yes, then that's a no.
Okay, there's a thrill to it. Like it's quick and there's a thrill, and you do like want to know what happens with it. So I'm a 50-50, I'd say.
I think that I'm going to go back to my answer and also on what you've just said as well. I don't think we should be telling anyone don't read these books.
Yeah.
I actually encourage you to read things like Angels and Demons and read the Da Vinci Code. The past 24 hours have been such a trip, guys, researching the background to the Da Vinci Code and what people's objections are and hidden gospels. I've learned a lot about Christianity in the past 24 hours that I didn't know about before. Mm-hmm. So read the Da Vinci Code, read these other books, but do additional reading.
I wouldn't read the Da Vinci Code to learn about Christianity, full stop, though.
I mean, use that as your jumping off point to go, okay, this is a thing that he says. Let's look at what actually happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What about you, Andrea? Would you recommend your book?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so uncomfortable, though, that I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who gets very affected by what they read. You might want to, put the book in the freezer for a little bit. Have you ever picked up a book just so you could weigh in on the debate? What is the most controversial book you have read? And was it a storm in a teacup, or was the outrage justified? Let us know by emailing comms@emirates.liftfest, or you can send us a message on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on YouTube. Don't forget to hit subscribe and give us a rating wherever you get your podcasts.
Bye. Bye. I always feel weird not saying goodbye at the end.